One podcast to find them, one podcast to bring them all, and in the podcast them. Welcome to the State of the Franchise. My name is Fred Dake, and I'm here with my co-host, Tom Stadler. Tom, how you feeling?
Tom is never late. He arrives exactly when he means to, Fred.
You shall not podcast.
How often are we going to keep doing this? To just keep going?
The whole episode.
I hope so. I feel like this is one of those episodes where we really can just kind of keep going with it, right?
Mm-hmm. This is what some may refer to as the trilogy.
Ooh.
Which some may not. You know, are we talking Star Wars? Are we talking the Alvin and the Chipmunks movie? I think there's 3 of those.
Well, are we talking or are we Tolkien?
Oh, you talking to me?
Yeah. So if you guys have not guessed this week, our episode is on the franchise of Lord of the Rings, which, of course, is the installments Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King.
Yes, and we're not talking about Elvis. We are talking about the Peter Jackson versions, of course. We may touch on other versions in future episodes. I know I'm just dying to bring Tom to my place, light up the blacklight posters, you know, cool down the lights, light some candles, get some of the finest weed in the South Barley, whatever they do in Hobbiton, and check out the animated version, because that might be my favorite, but nothing resonates with me more than this trilogy.
Wow. So this is like your top of the top when it comes to franchises, would you say?
I think just the trilogy, like, it's hard to encompass the whole franchise, and I think we're going to get into the pros and cons of what happens later a little bit. I don't, maybe one day we'll do the Hobbit trilogy episodes.
Yeah. I would be, a little more hesitant to that just because I felt like that shouldn't have been a trilogy, right? Like, I don't know. Like, how much do you need to put into The Hobbit? Just make The Hobbit, right?
Like, I feel you could do a 2-parter maybe, but still 3 was too much.
Yeah, I think it was just a smidge too much. So where did you get started then, Fred, when it comes to Lord of the Rings? When did you first experience it?
It was in the household. My dad, I would say, is probably the quintessential Lord of the Rings fan, and so is my brother Scott, who you met at my wedding. He's an English teacher, and he is definitely like a fan of literature with a capital L, and that's how my dad was too. I get it a little bit, but not as much as them. Like, I remember my earliest memory of Lord of the Rings is going to swim practice with my dad, and he had the cassettes of the live, like the dramatic reading where it had like the actors. I think Ian Holm from the movies plays Frodo in the voiceover, or not the voiceover, the like, what is it called when they like do the live reading?
Just voice actor? I don't know.
Like the dramatic version where it's got the sound effects and like people are played by individual actors.
I mean, like a radio play?
Yes, it was the radio play.
Got it. Okay.
I couldn't think of radio play for some reason. And this is kind of like a radio play.
Yeah. And I mean, this is our radio play that we do every 2 weeks. Which we might be getting off schedule at some point for some special holidays, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, and I'll just add on too, I will add on a sad note, my dad did not get to see these movies. He died a year before the Fellowship of the Ring came out, and he was following the news, and he was very excited about, like, I remember walking in the mall and him explaining forced perspective to me and not caring, which to me just sounds like me, like talking to my, like, that's like my future. Yeah. And he's like, you don't understand. You'll have like Arnold Schwarzenegger and he can be the size of your thumb.
I mean, that is kind of the one thing that still trips me up when I watch the movies is I can't understand how, and I went to film school and I still don't understand forced perspective of like, how does like Elijah Wood look so close to the camera, but yet he is so far away from like where Ian McKellen is standing?
Well, the short answer is old school movie magic, something you don't see in movies these days, which is why I argue this is some of the best like franchise stuff you're going to see, because I think this was like the last vestige of a kind of a combo practical CG movie. Like nowadays, if someone's being practical with their effects, it's like a smaller movie and they're making a big deal about it.
Right.
Like this was like the last time, I feel like. I mean, Jurassic Park, I guess, is the bigger one because that was, Stan Winston saying that he was extinct by looking at the CG. But
Yeah.
I feel this movie is like the last of the movies of this broad scope before it all looked kind of marvelly.
Yeah, but it was all like 8 years before that even happened, though, too. So it's like, and I think maybe it was the long legs of the production that obviously made it, still kind of have to use the practical effects and some of the practical usage, especially, too, in a time when it was still kind of pre-digital everything. I think the fact that it did kind of have to be the last of that thing, and it's almost like it kind of ushered in the era of the CGI. Well, I guess that's more Lucas, though. We can thank for that with the prequels. Then
You're welcome.
hope you enjoyed Jar Jar for 20 years looking terrible.
Well, what about you, Tom? What's your earliest memories of the Lord of the Rings?
So I literally didn't know what Lord of the Rings was before I saw the first movie.
Oh, wow.
And even then, it was a friend of mine who went and saw it and then was like, you need to come see this movie again with me. Like, he's like, it's so good. Like this huge epic journey. Like I saw like all the promotions and stuff. Like I think McDonald's or somebody might have had like the glasses that had like the characters on it. And I just remember kind of being like, it was very close to high school at that time. And I'm like, oh, okay, Lord of the Rings. I think it was even at the end of middle school. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'm always down for a good fantasy adventure. Like I'll watch whatever. So I went and saw it, and I loved it. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Like I can't believe they put this story on screen. And I just remember trying to get right away into the books, and I'll get into this a little bit later. I have some issues with Mr. Tolkien himself as far as it being a writer. I think he's a phenomenal storyteller who can build a world like nobody else could. But as far as like some of his actual writing, I am like, my guy, I have been listening to you talk about this grass patch for 3 pages. Can we move on, please?
And it's something that people ding Stephen King with, but at least Stephen King is flowery and interesting. He may be talking about not a patch of grass, but I think in The Shining there's like a part where he's just looking at the carpet and he's talking about how it looks like it's moving, and he's working into the transformation of the main character. And he's like, of course he wrote that high as hell or drunk as fuck, but it's good. And I do agree, when you read Tolkien, it's like kind of a list sometimes.
It is a little bit where he goes down and captures every detail, which, listen, is like, if you're trying to paint a scene, oh yeah, I've got it. But I had it about a page ago when you were talking about Aragorn, feeling the grass blades between his fingertips, and he could still smell the orc sweat or whatever it is. It's like, okay, yep, I got you. But yeah, I mean, I went and saw the other movies, and I enjoyed them. I started playing the video games too. So really, it was probably when I was about 13, 14 that I jumped into this feet first, and not knowing until later on that Lord of the Rings has been a thing for a long time. From people who watch the books. I know you have your beloved animated movies that you've been talking about, and you talked about the radio plays, and it's just like, I didn't know that was a world, though, too. I was very much, as we've talked about, a Star Wars kid. I was very into the space. So.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was very into like anime. Like for the first time, I was watching a lot of that. So I was still kind of getting out of my animated show phase before I was like, oh, there's like movies,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a thing where when I saw it in theaters, the first movie, I knew the plot because of seeing the animated movies, because the one in the middle, the Fellowship of the Ring / Two Towers, is about as book specific as the movies are.
Wow.
The new movies, like, that is legit. And then, of course, you have the bookends, which are a little more hippie-ish and kind of like, more like you'd see at a Spencer's Gift. But I went in and I brought my friend to the movie, and I remember just like whispering and telling him like, oh, that's Aragorn. Like, I was that annoying kid, and it was actually kind of cool. It was one of the experiences where I felt, I felt smart going in because I knew I had read the book, which I don't even think I had at that time. I just sort of absorbed it. It's like how we talked about just knowing that Darth Vader was Luke's dad.
Right. Wow. I just can't imagine that experience. So when you went in there as somebody who had experienced the books and all these other versions of it before you saw the movie, did you feel like those are still better than the movie, or did you suddenly jump on the movie train because you're like, somebody made this like pitch perfect, basically?
Well, I guess it's kind of hard for me because I will say, as time goes on, I think the Fellowship of the Ring, the first Peter Jackson movie, I think that thing hums. I think that thing slaps. I think it's one of the best kind of opening of a trilogies. It really sets the stage. It's a long movie, but it moves. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other two are really good movies. Like, that's how I feel about them. I think one is just and I think it's probably just the story getting so big. And, it's like kind of becomes like the Game of Thrones thing where we're flashing back between all these different story points. And there was something about the kinetic energy of that first one. We're following Frodo and going through this journey.
Yeah.
So I guess that first one is kind of the definitive, but then I can kind of take or leave the second and the third. More the third, really.
Yeah.
The second, I think that one's got the Helm's Deep and all that.
Yep.
But yeah, I think they just get a little too bloated. And then you add the extended editions, which I do enjoy watching from time to time. I feel as an adult, I don't have the time to watch them like I used to. That used to be a thing I did, but at the end of the day, my favorite version is the theatrical Fellowship of the Ring version.
Yeah. Which is, I think the version that probably got a lot of people to even fall in love with it who didn't have all that background that you had coming into it. I mean, certainly I can remember being in the theater where I sat like that. I always kind of measure how good a movie is by remembering where I was in the theater. Like, I remember seeing Avengers for the first time. Like, I can remember the spot I was. I remember the angle I was watching the movie at and just being, blown away. Or when I saw, Lord of the Rings, or even, now the whole franchise is not aged that great, but Pirates of the Caribbean. And I was like, wow. I mean, that was a hell of a run in those few years where everybody was decided to do trilogies. But nobody was doing it like Lord of the Rings. And I agree. I think the extended editions, when you watch them, you're like, okay, if I wanted to rewatch all this, that's 13 hours I have to devote to 3 movies. And it's just, it's interesting now, and I mean, we'll probably get into this later, that you have a show like Rings of Power that really is very okay with taking its time because it knows that it has, probably 30, 40 hours, way more probably, but of story to tell. And they can just kind of go, all right, well, we're going to take some time to introduce, Galadriel again. Galadriel? Galadriel. I'm like, that's not how you say her name. But yeah, Galadriel, we're going to reintroduce her, talk about what she was doing 3,000 years or whatever it was before all the events of Lord of the Rings. And it's just you kind of wonder, man, how could anyone get away with making movies this long anymore? This is almost like a time capsule in itself too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is I was talking about before. This is encapsulation before big budget movies kind of got samey.
Yeah.
This movie, I also do remember the first teaser coming out and it was very light on fantasy and thinking that it might be a boring adult movie. And then I think because I even remember going in with hesitation, thinking because I think at that age, you're like, am I going to like this? This might be a little too grown up. But I remember it just humming. That opening is pretty great.
Yeah, they toss you in and they let you just absolutely float. You are just on this water ride from the start. And it's just such an interesting choice. They're we're going to devote 10 minutes to backstory before we even get you going on this story.
And all written for the movie, I'm pretty sure. That's not, I don't think, how the books are. I think that's something that they cobbled together and we're we need to do a previously on.
Right, from the Silmarillion, right? Or
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which we're learning all about right now in this Rings of Power show. We'll have to talk a little more. Have you watched any?
I have not. I'm in the middle of a move, and it's all these big shows. Yeah. I'm just saving for my new place.
Okay.
Although I told you I did start watching Dahmer this morning, but that was just kind of it was when Netflix starts playing something.
Yeah.
And I was just
Yeah, okay, throw it on the background.
It's kind of like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where you're like pointing at the screen, like, I know that, but it's kind of horrible. Like, did they just say Kenosha?
Milwaukee, man. I mean, that's where we're based out of. It's on Marquette's campus. Oh, gosh. But lest we get too far into Milwaukee, let's talk a lot about Middle Earth today. And let's start from where it began. So, a little history and background on Lord of the Rings is that English author J.R.R. Tolkien created this story back in 1937. That's when the first one was dropped. And they released the books, so his publishers, between 1937 and 1949. So this guy put out 3 of like the biggest world building books, including, and he also wanted to include the Silmarillion in that, between a 12-year span. So, eat your heart out, George R.R. Martin, because clearly you got somebody who...
And the big difference between Tolkien and George R.R. Martin, Tolkien's been to war, bro.
Hey, Martin's been to New York Comic Con. That's as close to war as you're going to get. Man, what would Tolkien think of, like, Comic Cons now? Do you think he would even be like, this shouldn't be a thing?
I don't want to think about what Tolkien thinks, just because, like, I like Lord of the Rings, but he seems like if a dude, like, you brought him back to life today, he would not be happy. Yeah. He would be like, oh, they've got my show on TV. Oh, what are all these people doing here that are black? I don't like it. I have a feeling he would be kind of like on the opposite side of that. I just get the vibe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he... Maybe not as bad as like Lovecraft, but like still seems like he'd be a crotchety old man who would just
for
be
sure.
like, what are these children doing? So Tolkien was commissioned to do a sequel to The Hobbit right after the success of The Hobbit, and decided to make this thing about 1,000 times longer than The Hobbit was.
And going from a legit like a children's book to like an adult fantasy novel.
Mm-hmm. And it's, oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, you think about, and I've actually never read The Hobbit, so I'm going off of what I know from reading about The Hobbit and seeing the extremely long movies. I'm not going to lie, I like the length of everything, but it's like, you can't talk about this story without talking about how very long it is. But yeah, so, I mean, you go from having The Hobbit, which was pretty tight. You could probably read it in, a couple days, maybe less?
Less. You could read it in a day at the beach.
Yeah. Where now it's like you have The Lord of the Rings. If you want to get through the whole trilogy, you probably need at least a week or 2 if you're going to be reading nonstop.
It's like going from, like, Beverly Cleary to, like, Marriage Story or something like that.
It's the weirdest thing. Now I'm imagining Ramona Quimby like in Marriage Story,
just banging the wall. Beezus cannot live here.
Being alive. So Tolkien was 63 years old when he finally saw the series finished. So he finished writing it in 1949. The last edition was published in 1955. So he was already looking at those AARP checks by the time he was done seeing his books out.
Do they have that in England?
It might be like the AA...
Cheerio.
I don't know. You think we'd have more jokes with like the Queen's recent passing, but I just got nothing. You can't shit on England right now, can you?
Did she pass?
Oh, that's the conspiracy we'll all get into.
I don't know. I was watching this spider wedding, and then this old lady got involved in it. You didn't see that there was a spider on the casket?
No, I didn't.
That was my dumb joke. I was watching a spider funeral, and there was an old lady there, and it was the other way around.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The spider crashed it.
I get it now. It's funny.
It's super good.
I'm sorry you had to explain the joke. Tolkien did not intentionally want to make a sequel to The Hobbit. He wanted to just write other children's tales, and as he was starting to write and his publishers were asking for more stories about hobbits and goblins, he suddenly kind of found himself coming up with all these stories that started to feel like a spiritual sequel to The Hobbit, and decided to start writing all of that. So he started to outline the history of Arda and telling the tales of the Silmarils, and all of that kind of became the background for what we would now know as the Lord of the Rings, and more specifically, the timing of Lord of the Rings, the Third Age. So he died before he could put together all of his work cohesively, but his son edited his father's work, filled in the gaps, and finally published in 1977, The Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm. Let's paint the picture of 1977. You got Led Zeppelin on the radio, and they're reading these books, man. And they're like, I'm seeing connections here. We're going to write a song about this, man. I just think that's an interesting thing, just like the Tolkien work being adapted by like hippie drug culture.
Well, I think the funny thing is, too, so I probably started listening to Led Zeppelin in high school, but knowing still that Lord of the Rings was a thing, I didn't make any connections when I started listening to Ramble On. And I'm like, wait a minute, he's saying in the darkest depths of Mordor?
Yeah, and he talks about Gollum, right? Doesn't he? Like,
And Gollum, the evil one.
it's just funny because like that culture adapting books that are like a what's the word? A metaphor for like the worst world war. Mm-hmm. Like I just think it's kind of interesting. Like, yeah, we like how like the hobbits smoke pipe weed and such.
But you think about it too, and then it like defined what the 60s were, and then the 70s, and then we suddenly became very straight-laced in Reagan era and the 80s. I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of like, yeah, it really did have undertones throughout society up until, yeah, that like kind of like 80s roll around and everything became sort of like, I don't even know how to describe the 80s. I always kind of feel like they're like styrofoam. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I usually describe the 80s as cocaine.
Yeah. We kind of talked about this on our last episode too, right? That Macho Man came up through there. Let me tell you about J.R.R. Tolkien. I had a couple pipes back in my day, yeah.
I would have loved it if he was in Lord of the Rings. I feel like that would be kind of like a Peter Jackson move. Like,
right.
I'll cast Macho Man Randy Savage as an orc. I thought he had the build and the intensity.
He honestly freaking would, though. Imagine him just as like, yeah, like the orc that ends up sniping Boromir at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that big. Yeah, that was exactly what I was picturing.
Yeah, like that big, like, what do they call them? The Uruk-hai? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that, oh my God. That would have been awesome. I'm almost kind of surprised that there weren't more like wrestlers, but he was just casting all of New Zealand in those movies. So
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I think Tamara Morrison might be somewhere in there.
I think you might be right. Yeah, I think Tamara Morrison. I know Brett McKenzie from Flight of the Conchords is in there.
Yeah, he's like a elf, and he looks kind of unrecognizable, but once you know, you know.
Right. And I know they did get Stephen Colbert in the newer ones. Like
He's in The Hobbits. And I know they got Ed Sheeran in Game of Thrones. Which my wife is the biggest Ed Sheeran fan. When that happened, I just looked at her. I was like...
Very controversial. I know. Everybody brings it up. It's just like, guys, it happened. Just let it be.
Let it be.
Let it be. Tamara Morrison was not in Lord of the Rings because he was too busy doing the Star Wars prequels.
He could have done it all, though. Because weren't they filmed in New Zealand a little bit? I thought so.
I think most of that was London. I mean, like, Star Wars is famously filmed in, like, London a lot. But, yeah, no, he was too busy doing his all the clone troopers in those movies.
I'm pretty sure he's in The Pianist, though. Not The Pianist. No, The Piano. Yeah, I think he's in The Piano as a tribesman.
Not seeing it.
Tamara Morrison's gonna come beat the shit out of me.
he's like, I wish I was in all these movies.
Cliff Curtis is in The Piano, though. You don't have to look that up.
So it's Sam Neill, right?
Yeah, Sam Neill.
Yeah, we'll talk a little more about Sam Neill coming up in a few weeks. But yes, so back to Middle Earth for a little more jaunt through history. And not the history of Middle Earth, because if we try to get into all that, this would be a 3-hour episode, if not more. So,
I'm sure there's podcasts dedicated to all of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably something out there that, gets down to like every little thing. And that's how he came up with Bilbo. But yeah, so really that's kind of how it all came together though at the end. So we got the Silmarillion in 1977. And so that kind of completed the whole works, even though it was really just like that catalog, right? And, there was so many different influences throughout his life. You talk about World War II was such a huge influence on the stories and his time serving. And I think it just kind of came together is what it's saying from like all these different like short stories he was writing that he started to come up with this idea of the One Ring. And now we're all ruled by the One Ring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if you guys want more history, please look up the Wikipedia article. There is so much information.
Or just watch that movie Tolkien. I'm sure they are. It's full of information. Did you watch Tolkien? I didn't watch Tolkien.
I didn't watch it. I was actually thinking about this before I started doing research for this episode, but there are so few times I've rewatched these movies because they are such an exercise in how much can I take before I finally collapse. Like, I don't know that I've made it through Fellowship of the Ring an entire time since I've seen it in theaters.
Yeah, I feel what happens to me is I'll put on Fellowship of the Ring at night, and then I'll doze off towards like the 45-minute mark, and then when it gets to the elves' place, Lothlorien, I think that's the second elf place, but the first elf place where the Council of Elrond, it does this flash of like bright white.
Yeah.
And I just know that has woken me up so many times in a dark room because it literally just goes bright white.
Yeah.
And then it zooms into like Frodo's face.
But I feel like I've seen the rest of the series or the entire movies all together in parts. Like, if you had TNT or TBS, they would always be on, like off and on if you had cable.
It's kind of a weird Christmas movie. I feel it's always on around Christmas.
Yeah.
And if I'm like visiting family, I like to throw that on.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's like a perfect background movie too. Like you can just kind of have it on, converse, watch a little bit. Like, oh yep, Gandalf's fighting the Balrog here. All right.
Yeah, it's kind of like I really like Skyfall, but generally if I have Skyfall on, it's in the background. And I feel like that's the move with Lord of the Rings. Like, I'm gonna throw this on and go do something else with it in the background.
It's just wonderful though, because it's just like, I don't know. The Bond movies are also like perfect background movies. Like, you think about all these movies are well constructed. The first time you watch them, they'll blow you away. And I think all these are a delight to rewatch. But it's just sort of like to watch them with the same intensity and dedication that you did the first time around. It's just a lot to ask. It's not like watching, like, I don't know. I feel like Star Wars kind of turned into a background movie. But even when it's on, I feel like I want to watch it.
Well, Empire is the one that I can just like really snap into, and I feel like Empire, I'm not one of those like Empire is my favorite, it's the best one. I kind of like them all, but I just feel that one just has so many great story beats, and I'm like, oh, I have to watch this part.
That's actually, I would definitely say that's almost kind of how a lot of these classic franchises are constructed, especially Lord of the Rings. It's like there are pieces and there's scenes. Like, I don't know. I love watching the Council of Rivendell. I like them just kind of debating, like, no, like I should take it, and then they're like, what? This little dude? All right.
Well, like I said, you'll get no qualms with me on 1. It's 2 and 3 that I think are very much like I like to watch the parts and I'll not pay attention.
Which ending in Return of the King is your favorite part to watch?
When Frodo's like, I think I'm just gonna die early too. Like, screw it. I know I'm not quite of age, but I think I lived enough.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about that a little bit as we start getting into the highlights here coming up. I did want to give a little background about the movie development too, because it really was a long way to get it adapted. So while I'm not going to go through the whole entire book history, I wanted to give you just enough to sort of understand, where Tolkien came from and how that all came to be. There were efforts by a lot of people to try and adapt Tolkien. We had George Lucas, Stanley Kubrick, Walt Disney.
Mm-hmm. Kubrick was going to have the Beatles as the Hobbits.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. That was the original plan, was Stanley Kubrick directed with, the Beatles. I think probably Paul and George as Sam and whoever. I guess he'd want Ringo as Sam, though, to be honest.
Right? He does have Sam energy. Big Sam energy. But yeah, it was Dennis O'Dell is the guy's name, who considered Richard Lester, but then also thought about getting Kubrick. Michael Antoni and then George Lucas.
I was just gonna say a '70s Borman would have been baller because that's like Excalibur guy. Like that would have been
Yeah.
like the Led Zeppelin-y glossy one, which I wish that movie existed because I think we would still have the Peter Jackson ones.
Right. Well, yeah, just to give us like almost like the first iteration of it. It's almost kind of impressive that Peter Jackson's production was like the first one out of the gate. Because then it was briefly leased to Rembrandt Films before it was sold to United Artists, who later got acquired by New Line Cinema. But yeah, so in 1976, UA passed the rights to Fantasy Films, who then produced your animated adaptation in 1977 of The Hobbit by Rankin and Bass.
Who, if you're not familiar with that name, someone we may cover one holiday is Rankin and Bass. They make all those like the Rudolph commercial, or not commercial, the Rudolph movie, Year Without a Santa Claus. It's like American-made cartoons where they shipped all the animation overseas.
Yeah, right. And they have like the kind of the weird claymation. I mean, everybody's watched these movies, or they have seen iterations of these movies in some form or another. So then in 1978, Ralph Bakshi,
My guy,
made an animated feature of the first half of Lord of the Rings, and while profitable, the film did not make enough money to automatically warrant a sequel. And that led to him to abandon the project. And then Rankin Bass followed in 1980 with an animated TV adaptation of Return of the King. And then a lot of other fantasy films were produced at the time, including Jim Henson and Frank Oz's The Dark Crystal.
Dance, magic, dance. Oh, wrong movie, damn it.
And Lucas's Willow.
Which I saw for the first time this year.
How'd you like
pretty
it?
good.
Yeah, I'm actually somewhat excited for the sequel series.
I would say it was I've never been a big Val Kilmer fan. I always liked him. That was the role I was like, this might be my favorite Val Kilmer performance. He's like having a good time.
It's like, yeah, it's almost a shame because it seems like it's a project that he would easily come back to and just be like, I'm in, like, let me do what I can do. But like, yeah, I mean, obviously with his issues with the throat cancer that he's had, like, not going to be possible because it really is like a very different Val Kilmer role that, I don't know, it's just a good one. I'm glad we have that one.
And I'm not picking at the ill at this. I just actually think this would be great that if in the new Willow they do a cut to a tapestry, just like I haven't seen Top Gun Maverick, but I know isn't that like the vibe? There's like a nice military photo of Val Kilmer at one point, and he looks great considering. I think they should just do that in the Willow, like, oh, Mad Mark, and they just kind of, it's like a tapestry painting.
We have actually a scene with Val Kilmer in Maverick. Yeah, it was kind of, I think it was a little bit of a surprise for people because they didn't think he would do it. But yeah, there's a whole thing. I mean, you guys should go see Top Gun Maverick or find a way to watch it. It's fantastic. But yeah, they had him in there. He's talking, but he can't actually like use his voice. So they computer reimagined his voice in order to fill in his lines. It's really crazy.
And I don't want to know. I just want to see it when I see it. I was going to ask if it works. I'm not even going to look at you. Like,
no,
even
no, actually, I think it works because he talks in a hoarse voice because they build it into the story so that it's like, it sounds like, I mean, they computer like animated just him even like struggling to talk in order to get him some lines in the movie.
He couldn't stop clanking his teeth together, and it just affected his smell. I don't know. They were just I'm trying to, retcon stuff I remember from the first one into the second one.
Yeah, oh my God, he's such a Chad in that one.
Before we go back to Lord of the Rings, like, does that teeth click thing just set you on edge when he does that? Because it gets me.
I mean, it's always kind of like unnerved me just slightly, but I don't even know if I realize why it unnerved me.
I just think about doing it. And I'm just like, oh.
But in the Willow sequel, we are going to get Christian Slater now instead. Where I feel like it's like, if you can't get Val Kilmer, Slater's a good follow-up.
Man. Here you need me in a fantasy picture.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
I love Christian Slater so much as an actor.
There's potentially an opening where we could have to do some kind of like Heathers type thing. I don't know. I just want to talk about that movie for some reason.
I want to talk about Interview with a Vampire and Pump Up the Volume, so maybe we can just do a Slater. Have you seen Pump Up the Volume?
No, but I've seen Interview with the Vampire, and that's enough. So 1995, Peter Jackson makes his pitch to Miramax. So he's completing post-production on The Frighteners. Mm-hmm. It's an alright movie.
Yeah, it's great ideas, but it doesn't really work as a movie. And I think he's got a lot of clout because he's been this kind of gross horror movie director from New Zealand, but he made Heavenly Creatures, which was getting a lot of good press, which is Kate Winslet and Melanie Linsky from Yellow Jackets. Mm-hmm. And 2.5 Men. Yes. I just love she made that money. But it's like, I believe, like a lesbian thriller with those two in it. And it was like 90 or 89, and that was his like guarantor to get the Lord of the Rings. Like that was the movie they were watching.
Wow. That's really crazy. Because they went to Harvey Weinstein to talk him into it. So Miramax got involved.
And Bob Shea from New Line too at some point, right? Bob Shea, who was instrumental in making the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
Yes. So, it was Harvey Weinstein on behalf of Miramax, who got the rights from Saul Zaentz. And Jackson knew it would take a couple of movies to get it right. Couldn't do it all in one.
Because they wanted one, and this is what they wanted at the time. This was like the thing. They want one big movie. They even wanted that for Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. Just like, give us one big movie with all of it in it.
It's like, how long do you want this movie to be?
But also, it's funny, like, that's not what it is now. They're like, can we get, like, 3 TV shows and 5 movies and some spinoffs off of this project?
Yeah, right? I mean, even, like, the Batman, they're like, can we get just a Penguin show? Which, listen, I'll watch it because I love Colin Farrell in that role. But...
Can we get a chopped Gotham edition?
Chopped Gotham. I'm just imagining what the spinoffs will be. Maybe I'll have to do this for I coulda, woulda, shoulda for Lord of the Rings. But it's like, cooking with Gandalf. A wizard's recipe is always on time. Make sure to set your egg timer. This is the worst Ian McKellen I've ever done.
I can only do Ian like marble mouth yelling me Ian McKellen, which is like, fly you fool, fly you fool. Like you can do that's an Ian easy way to end.
Right? Yeah, it's like the Michael Caine thing. You just say my cocaine, but you say it in his accent, and so it's my cocaine.
The size of a tangerine.
Oh God. So. Jackson was going to do The Hobbit, so that was going to be originally doing The Hobbit and then 2 Lord of the Rings films shot back to back. That was the pitch. But The Hobbit was postponed for a later prequel. They decided we'll come back to it later. So they pitched the 3 films ideas to Miramax, but they didn't really want to take that risk, so they agreed on 2. That's when your boy... Bob Shea gets
Bobby
involved.
Shea.
So Robert Shea eventually got pitched the project, and he wanted to get somebody legit. So Harvey Weinstein was threatening to replace Jackson and his screenwriter with like Quentin Tarantino, which like is the funniest thing because I guess the scripts were just kind of like not working for Weinstein, so he wanted to cut it down to 1 film, and so he's like, I'm going to get Tarantino, which is thinking about Quentin Tarantino doing Lord of the Rings. It's just the funniest thing.
I would love it. Like, I know it's because we live in a world where we have we have 3 good Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm always into like seeing the Quentin Tarantino version of anything because I'm like, well, that's not the real one. That's just the QT version. But I just like, and the Hobbits, man, they're there, but they're shorter, man.
Which is weird because Viggo would fit right in with that movie too. He would just be doing a totally different Aragorn.
Viggo needs to be in a Tarantino movie.
I'm surprised he's not. Like, how did he miss out? Well, you know why? Because he's still hanging out with what's body horror guy? Who am I thinking of?
Body horror guy. Who's Viggo hanging out with?
The Fly.
Oh, Cronenberg.
Yeah, thank you.
Body horror guy. It was more the like gestures you were doing.
Well, I'm just thinking about like Videodrome and like I don't know. There's, like, everything's attached to metal. It's just sort of weird. But final cut rights were shared contractually between Peter Jackson and Robert Shea when they brought Robert Shea on board to help finance the rest of the movie. So basically, then Jackson got his way. We got 3 movies. Bing, bang, boom. 2001 Cannes Film Festival. Fellowship of the Ring is in there. with its full $60 million production, that's a lot for the first of a trilogy at that time. Like, Matrix wasn't getting that much money. I don't think. I think that was...
Yeah, and this was like a big boost for New Line because New Line, much like when they came out with Nightmare on Elm Street, was not doing great. And it was just kind of like they coasted off of the Lord of the Rings trilogy for quite a while. I think now they're kind of, you don't really see the New Line in front anymore. But
No.
it is kind of crazy because when I think of New Line, of course, one of the best production opening tags for sure, right?
Oh,
the
yeah.
like movie picture going through
Right,
and
the
all
film.
that. Yeah. Whenever you see a New Line thing like that, usually you're like, I'm in for some shit for a
Yeah.
movie. Like you're watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like you're going to watch something a little crazy, a little dark. To have that in front of like a prestige fantasy movie was like kind of cool.
Yeah, I was wrong, by the way. Matrix did have a $63 million budget. So they were pretty similar, but also doing two very different things. Talk about a movie that really used CGI or used advanced cameras.
And they also had kind of like a short film, I think, that they were able to make that really showed off what they were going to do with the Matrix.
Yeah, with like a $10 million budget or something like that. It was something crazy for like, a short, like 5-10 minutes, but got us a pretty amazing movie. But yeah, so basically though, Lord of the Rings took off from there. Peter Jackson got his way, and he had this whole vision coming in, where he read the books and finally was like, this is what I want to do, and I want to do it like to a T. And yeah, now we have all this stuff based on it. So I guess what are some of the things that you feel like, Fred, are like, what makes this series memorable and what make it Lord of the Rings?
Well, I think the product. Hey, I'm pretty against movies right now. The product,
Content.
the
We're making
content. Yeah, we're making content here. I would say the property of Lord of the Rings and the movies really compares to me to the Harry Potter movies because they came out around the same time, even though they're kind of different, kind of the same in some ways. But I think they're both successful at one thing, and is I feel like a lot of times I don't put on a Lord of the Rings or a Harry Potter movie to watch that movie. I do it to live in that world. And I think the Lord of the Rings movies do that really effectively. Like one of my big issues with the new Star Wars films, and I like stuff in them, I don't feel like I'm returning to the world all the time, But I do feel like you can throw on the Lord of the Rings and you feel like you're in Middle Earth, even if you're doing work on your computer while it's on the background. I feel it's immersive. And I'd compare that again with the Harry Potter movies, and I feel not all franchises do that for me. Hunger Games is doing that for me.
No, I think you're absolutely right, though. And I think it's just maybe the choice of even filming in New Zealand. And I had the pleasure of going to New Zealand. I've told this story already, years ago. And you get to see just like how beautiful of a place it is in real life. And then you see it on screen and you're like, oh yeah, like it's literally like one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Like it's so green, it's so fresh. It's just like, it looks as clean and like as good as like Rivendell does, or the mountaintops, like when they're going over like the mines of Moria, right? Like
it's like pre-colonial America is what I picture New Zealand to look like.
Yeah, and it's just, there are just these extravagant set pieces in it that really do look like a big world. Like there's people that live there. There's different, kingdoms, and it's a big thing, and it feels big. You don't feel like you're just in like, I don't know. Like I mean, if you're going back to the Matrix, like you kind of feel like you're always just kind of in New York City, right? Except for the third movie where you're weirdly in Zion. But it's never like, you don't ever really get the scope of what the world is. In Lord of the Rings, you get the scope of like, okay, Middle Earth kind of lays out like this, and like, yeah, they gotta go a long way to get to Mordor.
Yeah, and I think something else that works for me is just the Shire in Hobbiton is just such a lovely seeming place. I think everyone, like, my idea of like my perfect Sunday would be like, I think like a nice crisp fall day, no work. You're gonna throw on Lord of the Rings, and you're gonna make a roast chicken. And you're gonna make potatoes, and you might have like some some wine with it, and you're gonna like kind of eat as the hobbits do. Like that's something that I definitely think the food in the movies really works for me.
Yeah.
And I think combine like making an experience around Lord of the Rings is something that I tend to do. Like,
Yeah.
especially with food.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know why. Yeah, the scene where Sam is making potatoes in the Two Towers, maybe because it's an extremely quotable scene too, but just the like, yeah, you get the idea that he's just making some dank soup, like or whatever he's doing.
Yeah, I would love to just go to Bilbo's house and raid his pantry for tea cakes or whatever.
Yeah, they have like a weirdly like Irish thing to them, right? The hobbits,
Definitely.
just the way you were describing, and maybe it's the potatoes, but I don't know. Just how does that feel?
Yeah, it's like I saw the trailer for the Banshees of Inisherin. Inisherin. We'll see how to pronounce that when it comes out. But I feel like, yeah, totally. There's an Irish connection because that movie feels like kind of similar in that way.
Yeah, was it also filmed in New Zealand? Do we know?
No, it's Irish, probably.
Okay.
I would think he's an Irish guy. He's like, we're gonna film there.
Oh, Martin McDonough.
Yeah.
He's Irish. You can hear it just in the way you say it. You can't say it without sounding somewhat Irish.
But I definitely think these movies jump-started two big trends, which is kind of letting horror directors take the like big franchise movies. You saw like Scott Derrickson and the first Doctor Strange. And then it also just by having the extended versions, I feel like that was kind of the forefront of like combining your deleted scenes and coming out with like a collector's edition.
Right. Yeah, and certainly somebody took advantage of that. Snyder cut.
And I would say something that I almost prefer to throw on over the actual movies are those behind the scenes documentaries about, because something that we haven't talked about was when they filmed these movies, they did it in like a 3-year chunk altogether.
Right. Yeah, and I mean the fact that like that cast had to be there all together for that entire time, and like these guys all seem very closely bonded, like even well after that, especially the hobbits. I mean, we see, you know, Elijah Wood and Rudy.
I was trying to think of his name from Stranger Things. It's like a real like Bob.
Yeah. I can think of like all of his characters right now. I can't get Sean Astin. Yes,
Who's Goonie? I don't know.
Rudy. Yeah, Mikey, Mikey. Man, all those guys are making a comeback. I mean, Brolin never left, but everybody else just.
I would have loved some Brolin in a Lord of the Rings. I don't know. He could just be an orc, honestly.
It would be better though if he was somebody very like interesting, like Saruman, like. So you wanted to come here to ask for my help? It's kind of weirdly.
He's just doing Proto Thanos as Saruman. The ring has a certain weight when you feel it in your fingers. Perfectly balanced.
Like all things should be.
I'd like that. You know what the kind of sad story with like the Aragorn thing, that there was an actor who was gonna play Aragorn. He was there and they fired him.
Yeah, Townsend.
Yep, our guy from Queen of the Damned.
Yeah, I was even thinking of that just as you were bringing it up. Yeah, so it's Stuart Townsend was cast as Aragorn. How much did they film with him? Do we know?
I thought it was like enough to get dailies, and they were like, nah, which I don't think. I heard he's a guy who got big, like blew up real quick, and then was like kind of an ass, like hard to work with. Like he
man.
became shitty, and he's a guy who I think could have been a compelling actor. Like that Queen of the Damned movie is really bad, but I don't think he's horrible in it. Like he's doing the corny that is being required.
Yeah.
And he actually he did the Night Stalker reboot, which was an old TV show, Kolchak.
Yeah.
And it was pretty solid, I remember. But I mean, he's no my guy though.
Yeah.
Vigo, man.
Well, Vigo, I mean, and I think we're kind of hitting on something here. The cast of the movie, on top of the movies being just these great set pieces, having this giant like world, and obviously they have a lot of text to pull from. Tolkien wrote all these languages, right? Like he wrote Elvish, he wrote Orcish. Did he do that? Am I just making that up?
Probably. because I know it's kind of like the Elvish thing in the different languages. It's sort of like the Klingon thing, right? Where like people actually study it.
Yeah. Oh, the Black Speech, right? Also known as the Dark Tongue of Mordor, was the official language of Mordor.
Yeah, see, that's why Tolkien can't be around anymore. He can't be calling it black speech like that.
I mean, at least in this regard, it's more on like dark, like evil black
I know.
speech,
I'm just being mean to a dead man.
Yes, you should be. Why not? All dead men deserve some. George Washington, you're next.
I hope he's spinning around in his grave next to Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, man. But yeah, I think there's definitely, though, something to be said for, this world was built. It's like completely rich. It has all this history and backgrounds, and you can see all of it in the sets. And then you put very compelling actors in these roles, and it just all kind of comes together, right? Mm-hmm. And you just kind of see from Viggo Mortensen like on down, it's just like nobody's selling it short. Like they're all in. McKellen giving his all. Even like Ian Holm, like you were talking about, who was, which is a fun trivia if he was the voice of Frodo.
That I can guarantee.
Wow.
Yeah, the radio dramas were kind of intense. I remember that's my earliest memory of Sam taking on Shelob.
Shelob?
That's the big spider.
Oh.
In Shelob's lair.
Shelob. Probably.
It's not Sheila.
Clearly I need to just keep up. Yeah, Shelob.
Yeah. Which I feel like I just kind of remember being in the car and listening to that and it being kind of spooky. Because I think that's the other thing that is going for these movies. There's definitely the first one and a little bit of 2 and 3, but there's also some good horror moments that he gets in. Kind of just disturbing.
Yeah.
I feel that the Ralph Bakshi animated takes the cake as the most frightening version.
Really?
For sure. It's just the way they shoot the Dark Riders. A lot of the times it's like he'll animate, but then he'll have live actors acting and he'll animate over it just slightly so he doesn't have to fill the whole piece of animation. He's just kind of doing these weird outlinings, and when they walk they kind of have this and just see your face, you're a little freaked out because they just have that hood and their hands are mangling, they're feeling around and they're they're in pain from the ring. That's what I think is what they're going for in it.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I never thought about that. It's interesting that you describe it that way too, because I pulled from another franchise in Final Fantasy VII. There's something kind of a similar type of afflicted group of people that are being impacted by another entity that is not called Sauron, but it is called Genova, and it's but it has a similar impact. And I never thought about it that way, that the Nazgul are kind of like that, where they are. I just kind of assumed they were just corrupted to a T, where it's they don't really question their existence. They just are slaves to the ring, right?
Yeah, and I feel, I don't know what the issue, how it was back then, but I feel there's also just a clear addiction metaphor for this. They're addicts.
Yeah.
I will say, I won't touch on the animation too much because we will have that episode, but I will say this about it, put a pin in it, that in the documentaries about the making of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, he cites those movies and he lifts shots from the animated movie, the part where they're under the tree and the Wraith is looking above them, kind of feeling for them.
Yeah.
And he does the ring, he's almost going to put on the ring. That's straight lifted from the animated version.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. It is an interesting thing to think about, though, that they would have all these influences. I mean, it seems like so much Lord of the Rings, we kind of talked about, it came from Tolkien's experiences through war and through all of just his life experiences, of just how much of influence came into what ended up the movies it became. It's just pulling from this animated version of it, and it's pulling from this horror background of Jackson, and it's pulling from these books that are 80 years old at that time. It's just maybe not 80, I'm sorry, it's more 7 or 60. But it keeps going down the more I keep re-guessing. But it's it's just so interesting of like what a cultural impact that it had at that point, that it did have so many things to pull into this final live action thing. Like, you don't really see much like that outside of all these superhero movies now or shows where it's constantly pulling from the original text, and it's like, oh yeah, it's constantly the Leo point thing. Whereas like it's like in this one, it's like you really got to be kind of a Lord of the Rings geek to sort of pick up on some of the things. I don't know.
Yeah, there's subtle nods, of course, but I always think it's accessible at all times, which is really nice.
Yeah, for sure. It never feels like it's a story that's not for everybody, even though it's a story that clearly has a very like long history back, both in the real world and in the story itself.
I think just having the simplicity of like the ring is bad and it's got to go in the fire. like if you're lost in the movie, you'll cut to them and like, oh, they're still heading towards the mountain. Good. I know that's progress.
You know, that is one thing though I did want to like kind of touch on with the second and third movie, because I do feel like the first movie is very straight on with that. And I think that's some of the best ways to tell that story is like you have kind of this MacGuffin of like, we need to get the ring to Mordor, drop it in the volcano. But then, as you kind of said, like the second and third movie do get a little bloated where suddenly everybody's off in their own different directions. Like Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli are off doing kind of their thing, you know, fighting at Helm's Deep. While Sam and Frodo are the ones doing it, and you're almost kind of more like invested in the not ring story, and it just becomes a very, I don't know. It's like, do you feel as invested in every piece of that, or?
I'm actually the opposite. I'm more interested in Sam, Frodo, and Gollum than I am Aragorn stuff after he leaves. After he doesn't have the job of looking after Frodo anymore, I think Aragorn kind of becomes boring because he's just like into like two different ladies. He becomes a king. He gets a horrible makeover. Like, I just love that meme where it's like, how could you do this to a king? And it's like him from the first movie looking all hot with his long hair and his black cloak. And then it's him with the nice like hair and like the beard.
Yeah. Which is always so funny too. They were so willing to put him on the throne because Isildur sound like he kind of sucks. Like, even though he took down Sauron, but it's sort of like, you know, you kind of had a chance to end this all a long time ago, and you're like, I'm going to keep this thing.
Yeah, he seems like a douche. I'll definitely say that. He seems kind of like a frat guy to me, this Isildur. Isildur!
No. This movie is very quotable. I mean, I'm talking about the whole movies all together. And I know we're giving a lot more attention to the movies and the books, which obviously that's kind of our focus here, because I think that's a thing that most people know.
For sure.
You'd have to do a lot to get through some of the books. But I'll have to admit something to you. I have never finished the first or the second book. I forced myself to finish the third one just to know how it actually ended. But even then, I was very tried at the end to get to the end, because I was halfway through the book. I was like, okay, so Frodo lost the ring, fell into the fire with Gollum. Why are there 150 pages left? So it's like, what? Is there more? Is that not it? And then you read on, and Sauron's gone. And then you find out about how Sam spent the rest of his life and how Frodo spent the rest of his life. It's just, it's a chore sometimes to get through some of that, you know?
Definitely. I mean, we all had to go to the bathroom at the end of that one. I think we all remember, like, okay, we can, oh, damn it.
Yeah. Oh, and there's Merry and Pippin. They're in. Okay, we're still going. All right. Okay, now they're bowing to Frodo. Great. There's more. We're back in the Shire. All right, we'll fade out. Oh, okay. Well, boy. Right.
So, did you recognize Elijah Wood and Sam? Rudy. Why can't we think
Sean
of Sean Astin? Did you like know them before going into the movie?
Definitely.
I think that was my first exposure for sure, because I didn't see Goonies till I was older.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I remember seeing The Faculty later, which is Elijah Wood's in that, and it was like, whoa, yeah. Frodo's in like a normal movie. And then later I finally saw The Good Son, which I like that movie. It's a weird movie.
Never
but I like
seen
it. Come on, you got Elijah Wood and evil Macaulay Culkin.
That's kind of fun. No, I knew Elijah Wood because of North, which got like a famously like vicious Roger Ebert
That's
review.
the Reiner movie?
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
But yeah, like Roger Ebert basically like starts this review. He's like, I hated this movie. Hated this movie.
That was like what ended Reiner's like miracle run of movies, like Stand By Me, Misery,
Yep.
and some more.
Yeah.
Oh, Princess Bride.
Yeah.
He was just hitting out of the park. And then, I heard that movie. Like, people were like, no.
Yeah. It's a very, I don't even know how you describe it. It felt like it almost tried to take the vibe of like The Princess Bride and put it into like the real world, and it just didn't work. You have like Jason Alexander and Julia Louis-Dreyfus like as a husband and wife, like Elijah Wood's parents, and you're like, how did you miss on this? But
That's just a terrible casting idea.
I mean,
like-
he doesn't look like he'd be their kid, right?
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, you can't have George and Elaine as a couple. Like, everyone's going to be like, this feels like a weird Seinfeld thing.
Yeah, but I think Elijah Wood's not as like cynical as they are, though, too, right?
No.
Like, that's what I'm saying. Is like personality wise, it doesn't look like that'd be his parents. Like,
Yeah, they've never, like, looked at something with awe in their, like, life.
Right.
And that's how Elijah Wood looks at all times.
right? Yeah, like he's constantly like being surprised by something. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think when you look at this movie, though, you really can't imagine anybody else being Frodo or Sam or anybody, really.
And it's just so funny. They're big movies and no one talks about how they're doing, like, not bad, but really, like, basic faux British accents. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's just doing this. Unless they're the actual English actors. But, like, I feel the American actors are definitely just kind of, like, doing the thing where they sound like this.
Right, Mr. Frodo.
It is just funny that he, like, cast, like, 80s kid actors, American 80s kids actors, and then they're, like, the stars of this, like, kind of, like, I would say more European fantasy.
Yeah, it was like the men's Yellow Jackets of like. It's but it worked. It all worked. I do think though, as we were kind of talking about the second and the third movies, I mean they're a delight. I think when you look at everything all together, the story is wonderful, and even the stuff that doesn't get as related to like the One Ring or anything, you're still invested. Like when they get surrounded in Mordor, and you're like, oh, this is gonna be it. Like they're going down now, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, army's back off, and that's it. But I think when you look at some of the opportunities you could have done, maybe in our coulda, woulda, shoulda segment, you think about some things that maybe you could have done differently, whether it is different ways to make the movie, and they did the animated movie, but was it, this Beatles version would have been a hell of a movie to see.
Yeah, I would say I wish we would have gotten a proto earlier version, like a 70s, like the Borman or the Kubrick one.
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, of course, yes, we want the Kubrick Beatles one. Yes, that's what we want. But, like, I feel in a more, like, a world that makes sense, it probably would have been the Excalibur guy who got it.
Right.
And I think that would have been a very cool movie. I think that's probably my biggest coulda, woulda, shoulda. Because I don't know what they could have done to make the second and third one more streamlined, because that's just not the books, baby.
And I think, and we're giving them a little grief. I don't think either of them are bad movies.
No.
Return of the King is an Oscar winner for a reason. I think, but it's more of a...
That's a cumulative Oscar, though.
Right, it's for the whole story. But it deserved it. It was an incredible production, like one that will never be touched again. And it was, it was greatly directed, perfectly cast, beautifully shot. All the practical effects are going to keep aging like just fine. Like, because look at how bad the prequels for Star Wars stage now. This CGI looks terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite things to like point out, even though it kind of shows kind of a peek behind the curtain, but a shot that just shows the kind of stuff they're doing is when they take the Buckleberry Ferry to the inn in the beginning of the first one.
Oh, yeah.
And Frodo's looking up at the guy who's working the bar. Mm-hmm. There's a patron that comes by, and Frodo is waist high to this patron. The patron is crossing in front of the camera. If you're watching, it's big, like, fake hands.
Oh, wow.
And you only notice if you're looking for it. And just that's how they did a lot of that stuff. Like, when Frodo and Gandalf are in the cart when they're riding into Hobbiton, it's just like that trick perspective of putting Frodo further back and making the cart two different sizes and combining the shots. Yeah, like you said, that will age really well. But I think that one scene in the inn, if you watch that, you just can kind of see the seams, but you respect the seams.
Yeah,
kind of.
right. Well, you just accept it for what it is because it's just hearing it flash and gone, right? Mm-hmm. You know, something else that would be kind of fun. We were talking about this Beatles version of the Kubrick, you know, that he could have made this. But I always thought, like, Monty Python would have been a really fun way to make this movie, too. And you would have just done it all in one shot. And, like, in the most different way possible. Like, you think about Holy Grail, right? And, like, what a romp that is and just how unserious it tells, like, a very long, rich history of King Arthur. But it doesn't give a shit about following the details. It's there for the jokes. And, like, that feels like that's the alternate version of Lord of the Rings that we didn't get. It's just...
You're talking, like, a one-off, like, Monty Python and the Holy Grail... Monty Python, Lord of the Rings, Monty Python, Life of Brian kind of deal.
Yeah.
I like that.
Like, it almost would be like the ending of that would basically be just like, yeah, John Cleese is like Gollum or something like that, or Eric Idle, and he just trips and falls into the volcano, you know? Like, it's just some shit like that.
Well, then a giant foot would come down and smash the whole scene, right?
Right, exactly. Maybe it's just the love for Monty Python.
Do you have, is that like your favorite of the movies, do you think, Holy Grail?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I have a weird relationship with Monty Python. It kind of feels timely to talk about it because it was sort of like same time. Mm-hmm. But I just felt like, I don't know, Life of Brian, like I always heard all of the years, like, oh, this is like, can't see this. It's like banned movie, and it finally makes its way on Netflix. And I'm like, whoa, like, okay, all my life, nobody will distribute this or put this on. And I watched it, and I felt like because so many other properties took shots at like the Catholic Church and everything, that it just sort of felt like, I feel like I missed when it would have been really that shocking or revelation. Or it's like South Park did that, and then like, you know, like spit on it, pissed on it,
added better songs.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, okay.
But I am a Life of Brian boy. That's probably my favorite.
That?
I like it more as a movie, but I think Holy Grail is way funnier.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree with that. I mean, I think it's the funnier movie. I don't know. I just like it all together.
Yeah. If you watch like a lot of those, like, and now for something completely different, and some of those,
I do like their sketches a lot.
Me too, yeah.
I think the sketch show is maybe my second only to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Mm-hmm. But I think there is something to their humor that really would have worked with something that's kind of like, I don't know, so deeply fantasy like Lord of the Rings. And maybe because we saw what they did with King Arthur's like Search for the Holy Grail, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, this could work.
About like a Led Zeppelin Broadway musical, Lord of the Rings.
Oh my god. I never considered that, but that'd be outstanding.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't a coulda, woulda, shoulda, and it could even be a whole entire episode. You did bring this up before. Great video games, the Two Towers and the Return of the King game, especially the Two Towers game.
Yeah,
I loved it.
I did too. I actually really enjoyed playing that.
Probably the best movie games, maybe. Yeah, I'm talking like license, like the actors are on the screen, like full on, like that.
Ah, man, I think you might be onto something. Yeah, I can't think of anything that would be. I'm going through like all the movies in my head. There's a ton of terrible movie adapted games. Just, I mean, you watch like YouTube videos of people who review video games. They're always doing movie games because they were so bad. But yeah, Lord of the Rings doesn't show up on there. Oh, that Spider-Man 2 game was pretty good too.
I never played Spider-Man 2. Everyone talks about Spider-Man 2. I had the first one.
It was revolutionary for the time. Now the PS4 version is like the quintessential. But like nothing touches that. But it's,
for sure.
It was good for the time. It was just fun because it caught the mechanics like how it should have been. But yeah, I think the games are good. I've heard Shadow of Mordor is good. Yeah. Some people really front for that game amongst like is like one of the best they've played.
You're talking about the sequel of the two, because there's two of them. Was Shadow of the Mordor the first one?
Maybe, and it might have just been a totally like separate thing.
Yeah, because I remember I loved the first one, and then the second one seemed like it was just like more of the same. I remember, but the first one was really fun.
Okay, Maybe that was it then. But yeah, I mean, I think the games were great, and I think it's almost inevitable we're gonna get more games at some point.
Yeah, we have one that's like a multiplayer Mines of Moria, like kind of like I think you got 4 people and you were in there and you're hacking and slashing and it's like an online experience.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's the vibe, kind of like an exploring the mines and such.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much out there too.
The Gollum game is coming out.
That's right. I did hear about that. That's going to be interesting just to kind of see his perspective on everything and like what he's doing. I mean, I think we do have to kind of get into with games though too, and more that they could do now. Because like you could theoretically do like MMOs, and I think they have like a Lord of the Rings MMO, but like people play like their own like Dungeons and Dragons versions of that. The hard thing about doing a coulda, woulda, shoulda with a franchise like Lord of the Rings is a lot of people started doing this stuff on their own because they were such mega fans.
Right.
It's like you have these like cheaply made movies, or you have like, you know, this first iteration, this animated version, right, that they started basing scenes off of. Like I have like people that I know who like met playing kind of like a online MMO that wasn't like World of Warcraft. It was literally just kind of like you play as a character and then you kind of just make up this world. It's almost like Second Life. You ever play Second Life?
No, I've just seen the Office episode. I've been rewatching The Office and I just watched that episode last night.
Oh my gosh. So it's like that, but like with Lord of the Rings, and it's like, so you try and think of something new. I mean, the only thing you can really do is like alternate versions of what we already have, right? Like what else would you do though if you could even do something further than what we've seen already?
I think like a Hobbiton tycoon, like you just build your own Hobbiton. You have a fireworks, party, you have a birthday party. You have to figure out how many poop ditches you have to install in the surrounding area.
My God, I could totally see it too. I'd love it. I think one thing that I was just kind of thinking about though too is trying to do like another version of Lord of the Rings that maybe is just like an animated show, kind of like
that Star Wars thing.
Yeah, kind of like Clone Wars is what I was thinking of.
Oh, I was thinking like the anime thing that Star Wars did.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I would like to see. And I'm not I'm a very particular, if I'm going to watch an anime, I'm really like it.
Yeah.
I would love to see what they did with Star Wars, but with Lord of the Rings, like 10 animated shorts that were animes.
That would actually be really fun. I could get really on board with that. Because I think one thing that, we were talking about Rings of Power before, and now you have a show like that that's getting into like this history and this era that we only kind of have sort of like a documentation of like what the events were, but we don't really know who the characters were, or like how some things came together. It's sort of like what's happening with House of the Dragon too. It's funny that they're both happening simultaneously, because it's sort of like, hey, here's all this stuff that happened way before all the characters in the story that you know, but it really opens the world up in Rings of Power. Be like, this is thousands of years ago. Like, we can really do anything else and like wholly make up a whole other like society that's just gone in the Third Age, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you could explore more stuff like that in a show like that. You could also just do, like I was kind of saying, like an animated version of just like the actual Lord of the Rings retelling. Not that they didn't film everything already in the movies, but
well, I'd like it to get into the hands of GDT, because he was originally slated to do The Hobbit, and
that'd been so good.
That would have been the version I wanted.
We could do a whole episode on Guillermo del Toro projects that did not come to fruition. Like
the Mountains of Madness. He's getting his Pinocchio movie coming out on Netflix, which I'm excited to watch after watching the dog shit Zemeckis version.
Man.
There's like nothing in that movie to watch. Yeah, there's nothing good.
I was like, maybe I'll watch that when I got time, but right now I don't feel very much urge to do it at all.
No, from minute one, this is bad. That's what I said to Ashley after, because it's like Jiminy Cricket and it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and I was just like, this is bad. And Paul F. Tompkins read for it.
Oh wow, really? Mm-hmm. For Jiminy Cricket?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
But I'm excited to see the GDT Pinocchio, and I would love him to do like, he's doing a Lord of the Rings Netflix 6-episode show, and it's just kind of, I don't know, him working with some animators, making something interesting.
Yeah, kind of like how the Hobbits, what they do when everybody's gone. They pretend like nothing's going on in the world. Hey, did you bring in today's crop? Ooh, a lot of smoke overhead, huh? It's kind of like living in northern Wisconsin. Like, you're hearing about like all the stuff going on in Milwaukee. Oh yeah. Sounds like they got a ruckus going on down there. Hey, bring in the goat.
Or like a whole movie around that glary guy in Hobbiton. You know, the guy where he's glaring at Gandalf, and then he sets off the fireworks and he's laughing, but then his wife is behind him glaring, and he looks at her and she's glaring. He's like, I better glare too. And he puts on that real stink face at him.
I just see now that you were talking about your like episodic, your anthology show. I want to see like all the random characters from Lord of the Rings that we don't get to spend time with. Mm-hmm. What's Wormtongue like in just like an off day?
If they get Durf back to do like an episode centric on Wormtongue, I'd love that.
Listen, my lord. He like was the prototype for like every shitty character on Game of Thrones. And I mean shitty, not like bad. I mean like shitty, like conniving, like sneaky. Mm-hmm.
But they never were brave enough to make him as greasy or wet looking as Brad Dourif does in those.
Right. No, he looks like a parasite. It's so crazy. So, anything else you want to share on Lord of the Rings here, Fred? I mean, I know we could probably go for a long time.
Yeah, let's get into our power rankings.
All right. So the power rankings this week are top 3 characters. Speaking of. Fred, would you like to have the honors of going first?
I will. I'm going to start with, like, I feel this was their favorite movie character, but I feel like most people, it probably goes away as you get older. It was definitely Legolas at the time. Yeah. I was like, this dude is murking people. He had, like, the best action scenes. But then you rewatch and you're like, okay, he's there. I think now it's definitely Viggo and Aragorn is my number one guy. And then it's going to be Sam, and then Merry and Pippin count as one. Those are my 3.
Dang it. You took my idea of Merry and Pippin counting together. I'll go number 3, though. I'm going to go opposite you. I'm going to go Gimli.
Ooh, Gimli ages well. Like,
yeah. I just love John Rhys. Is he Myers? I'm like
John Rhys Davies.
John Rhys Davies, that's this one. And I just loved him from Indiana Jones. And when I found out he was Gimli, I was like, yes. And he's just so extra as Gimli.
And he's a dude who's like he's like 6 foot something. He's a big guy.
Big dude playing this little dwarf. And I just, even watching, I keep talking about Rings of Power, but it's a fun show. I really think you should watch it.
I'm ready to.
Anybody listening should check it out if you're even like halfway interested in Lord of the Rings. But it's always so funny with the forced perspective and seeing them make large men just look like dwarves and just these tiny people. Yeah,
I'd be interested to see how that all looks in even like 20 years later. Yeah. 20 exactly, right?
Yeah, and it's not even like, I don't know that they're doing any forced perspective in the show, but it just still looks like it's not distracting at all. It doesn't look like they're like animated to be smaller. Like you know what I mean? Like in Ant-Man, you kind of get that sense of like when he's like smaller than he is. And, you know, even like halfway between and what is it, Ant-Man 2?
Oh, I love that scene, but it does the effect definitely looks strange when he's like small.
Yeah. This doesn't have that issue. I don't know what they did, but I just kind of take it for what it is. Number 2 though, I'll probably have to go with Gandalf.
Ooh, yeah.
Just because he's a G. He's a Gandalf. Yeah. I think he was the reason I think I ended up really loving that movie was, especially being a big X-Men fan, coming off seeing Ian McKellen. You can tell I was very into the cast. But
well, the future Charles, not them. That's also like the one, I can't do an Ian McKellen impression, but I can say that one line just like Ian McKellen, I think.
Why do you always ask the questions Joe they know the answers to?
That was good. That was good.
That's like my favorite line. But coming off of X-Men, where he plays just Magneto to a T, and then you get him as Gandalf playing a totally different character, and he just had so much like bravado, and like you follow Gandalf for so long in the beginning of Fellowship. It's like I never thought he was quite as good when he came back as Gandalf the White.
Nah.
I still don't really get, even in the story, like what happened. So he like resurrected. Is that the whole thing?
Yeah, he does. I think by the act in which defeating the Balrog, kind of like he like plussed up.
Okay.
Like in a video game. I mean,
So he like leveled up. He's immortal now,
Yeah.
right? As Gandalf the White.
But
Yeah.
it's all about Gandalf the Gray. I agree.
Like there's just like an edge to him when he's Gandalf the Gray. Like he's almost kind of like he's still kind of got that old kook kind of to him. That like it's like
Coot.
That's kook. Yeah, he's a good kook. But like he has that energy of like Merlin from Sword in the Stone.
Definitely.
Yeah, and then he just kind of comes back, and you're just like, oh, he's kind of like boring old grandpa now. He feels more Dumbledore when he comes back as Lord Gandalf the White.
Here's something that I've been workshopping for the episode with a good friend of mine, Isaac, who we wish could be here today.
Yes.
James Gandolfini. You shall not pass the gabagool.
I'm still here, everyone. I'm just like rubbing my temples and trying not to knock at my microphone. This is a mess. Gandolfini. It's good. It's a good one.
It's good.
I'll give it to you. Number one, no surprise, Mary Pippin. Why not? Right?
Hell yeah.
You just should have had a breakfast. What about second breakfast?
I think, is that the most quotable line of the whole movie? Like, I just love, everyone loves saying second breakfast.
Right? It's just so good. What about afternoon tea? 11's luncheon. I love the idea of just, and I know from the behind the scenes that Vigo was actually throwing the apples at him when he's like looking for more. And I just love this idea of like Peter Jackson just be like, yeah, toss it at him. Because you know Vigo's into that shit. That's the way that he loves every movie he's in. And way too much that he loved Green Book.
Yeah, but man, he eats that pizza like nobody's business in that movie.
He never shorts it in any movie. He's all the way in. When he's fighting completely naked in Eastern Promises.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit.
Now you're talking my Cronenberg. I like my crime Cronenberg.
Yeah.
My history of violence and my...
Oh, that's a good movie, too. I did like that a lot.
The Big Hurt, R.I.P.
Yeah. Oh, man. Too bad.
Just an Oscar-winning performance, and he's in it for like 5 minutes or
Yep.
something like that. That's how you do it.
I don't even remember that he was in that movie. That's how long it's been since I've seen it.
He literally comes in for like a one scene, and I'm pretty sure he won the Oscar.
Oh, my God. That does track, though, because they're probably like, we got to get her to an Oscar. Although, didn't he have one at that point, or no?
Maybe for the Spider, the Jade Spider Woman or whatever, the older movie.
I got to look.
Not Altered States. Have you ever seen Altered States?
No.
He starts doing like ayahuasca pretty much, and he's like a scientist, and he starts turning into a proto-human caveman. It's like a horror psychedelic movie. It's good.
He did not win, though, for History of Violence.
Nominated, right?
Nominated.
Okay, just
But he did win for Kiss of the Spider Woman.
I knew it was he won for something with kissing a spider.
Yeah. Best leading actor. Yeah, you had it. You had it. So that unfortunately brings us to the end of our episode here today. I was very afraid we were going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think we have a lot of follow-ups planned. I mean, we've talked a lot about a couple different big franchises that there's just too much to eat in one episode, you know?
You need at least a second breakfast to eat.
You need a second breakfast is exactly right. So we will definitely be revisiting Lord of the Rings.
And we will talk to you later. But that's not the end of the episode.
No, it's not. We have our plug segment. Fred, anything that you would like to plug this week?
I'm out there, I'm living life, I don't have anything in the books, but I'm like I said earlier, I'm in the middle of a move. Once I get moved, I'm sure I'm going to have stuff on the docket.
Yeah.
Come see me at the interchange or, just listen to old episodes of the podcast, They're not just one listens, you can really, they're like movies, you listen to it 2-3 times, you really catch stuff you didn't hear the first time.
It's true, especially if you go back to like that Batman episode. There's a lot in there that I think y'all will be very happy to revisit. And yeah, definitely make sure to check back, listen on the episodes that you haven't listened to yet, because there's some good stuff in there too. But yep, we'll be sure to give more on Fred in the near future. For us at State of the Franchise, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate wherever you're listening to us out there. Also, we have still some email collection we're looking for right now at stateofthefranchisepodcast@gmail.com. Send us those emails. We want your Halloween. What are we looking for, Fred? Scary stories?
Scary stories, moments of fear. We want any paranormal experiences, or also we want to hear what you think of the selection of great horror that has come out this year. Yes. Even just like right up, if you saw The Black Phone, tell us what you thought. If you saw X, tell us what you thought. What are some other horror movies that came out this year?
Well, I mean, Barbarians in theaters, at least right now as we're speaking. We did also have Pearl, which is the prequel to X.
Oh, yes. Saw Pearl. Beautiful looking film. Great acting.
Yeah. That's all I got to say about it.
That's all I'm going to say about it. Scream came out this year. It was great.
Scream came out. We're going to have Halloween Ends coming up here, too.
Which I hope is interesting. That's all I want from it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go beyond even horror, though, Fred, and I'll say, in general, the movies this year have been very impressive. Clearly, post-pandemic, studios are willing to release a lot of movies, and I've seen a lot of great stuff so far this year. I'm excited to really talk when we end up doing another movie breakdown episode, probably sometime in February, March, for a certain event that's going to be on that, but we don't like to tip our hands too much. But yeah, so please send us your scary stories, fictional or real.
Fictional or real, and then, yeah, what thoughts on the movies coming out this year that are horror-related?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. As usual, if you would like to donate or you'd like to subscribe to our Buy Me a Coffee page, that's buymeacoffee.com/SOTF. Any amount is accepted. But really, we are just more than happy that you are listening to this podcast. Please tell your friends. That's the best donation you could give us, everyone.
Yeah, we appreciate the ear ganders.
Yeah, that's all we're after here. We're having fun. We hope you're having fun too. And stay tuned for next time, where we'll be talking about Jurassic Park. Fred and I got some hot takes. We'll be sharing that. We will see you then.
But that's not the end of the episode.